So in this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate how to insert data into our table called University Students, because we've already created University Students table and we have added columns like ID, first name, last name, email, and phone number. So I'm going to demonstrate different variations of the insert into command or keyword, right? So insert a single row, inserting multiple rows, and using the set syntax. So different ways we can insert data into our table. So let's dive right in. The syntax for inserting is simply insert into, right? Pretty straightforward. And of course the name of the table, which is University Students, and of course you can use it whatever you're calling your table the name. So here we have the University Students, so I'm going to insert into University Students, and then parentheses, and of course the data, the names of the columns. So first I have to specify first name, and then comma, last name. And by the way, you may have, instead of the last name, you may have surname, because in a previous lecture we changed the name to surname. So you can change it back to last name, and that'll be a good practice for you. And then we have email, and then of course the phone number. Perfect. So these are the columns, right? And then the values that would go into these columns would be, of course, in a string, that'd be, say, John, right? There we go. Perfect. So that'd be the first name, because this name will go into the first name column. And then I have, let's do a comma, and then the last name, right? That would be John Doe. Now once you have this, the next is email. So I have to put a comma and specify the email. That would be, for example, john.doe@claydesk.com, and of course comma again, single quotation, and then the phone number. So that could be, of course, whichever phone number you like to enter. For example, I'm going to say 123-456-789. Great. I'm going to end this, close the parentheses, and of course do not forget the semicolon. So what I'm essentially doing here is simply inserting values into our table called University Students, first name, last name, email, phone number, and then I'm giving and specifying these values to go into these particular columns. So let's execute our SQL here. Perfect. In the action output, you'll notice it is successful, and then if I refresh, the data should be within these columns. How do you actually see it? Well, on the bar here on the menu, you can see the execute the explain command. This will open up the result grid that you can actually see the output. On the other hand, the shortcut is, if you take your cursor and next to the table name, University Students, you'll notice the small three options show up, right? And one of them is the result grid. So if I click on this, this is actually going to give me the result grid. And not only the result grid, but I get the form editor in the latest version of Workbench. I get the field types, I get the query stats, the execution plan as well. So for example, if I click on query statistics, it'll give me the details for this. If I click on the execution plan, it'll give me a visual diagram of the executing this query is all about. For example, it scanned the entire table and then it executed the query. Although it's certainly not recommended, because the cost of executing is very high. That means if you have a large table, that's not recommended. But for our instance example, this is perfectly fine. So let's navigate back to, let's move up. There we go. So here's the result grid. So now we have the ID one, and notice, you might recall that we did not use here the ID, right? Because it's an auto increment, and that's how we set it up. So this ID is automatically inserted, okay? And that serves as a primary key as well. So we don't need to specify the ID because it's auto increment and it'll automatically be added. So if I navigate back to the result grid, you'll see the ID is 1, John Doe, and then here's the email and then the phone number. Great. So now we see that in our result grid, the data has been inserted into our University Students table. And the command, by the way, to run or to find the data is select. The asterisk represents everything, right? So that means all. So select all from clay-db, which is the name of the database right here, and then dot university underscore students. That's the name of the table. All right, let's go back. So now you've learned how to insert a single row. Well, how about if you want to insert multiple rows? How do we do it? Well, let's move on to inserting multiple rows. So I'm going to go ahead and say insert into, same command, it's the insert into, and then the name of the table, university students. Right after university students, I'm going to specify the same things, first name, comma, last name, comma, email, and then of course my phone number, right? That's what I'm going to specify. And then the values that I would like to enter now. Since multiple individuals are going to be inserted into this table, right? So this is simply inserting multiple rows within the table itself. So within values, I'm going to go ahead and say that would be, for example, let's say Jane, comma, and then Smith. That'd be the last name. And then I also need to enter the email, right? So I'm going to say jane.smith@claydesk.com, comma. It's straightforward. Once you get used to it, it's not that bad, okay? And then of course 1 2 3 4 5 6 3 4, and I'm just making these phone numbers up. Close the parentheses, and of course I need a comma because I need the next line, because I need the next record to be placed. And here I'm going to go ahead and say Alice, for example, and then comma, I'm going to go ahead and say Johnson here, comma, and then I need the email for Alice. So Alice Johnson at claydesk.com, and I'm going to go ahead and do one last, which is the phone number, and this is going to be 444-555-1234. And then let's go ahead and enter one more. Let's go ahead and do that. And notice, by the way, if I miss something, it gives me a little red X next to this particular line, which means there's an error in here, and I can quickly identify because I've not used the quotation, the single quotation mark. And this allows me to fix this particular area right off the bat, so I don't have to worry about what it needs to be done. So instead of parentheses, this is going to be just the quotations. Perfect. There we go. So once I fix this, you'll notice I need a ending parentheses right here. There we go. I need to have one more quotation, which I'm missing. Perfect. There we go. So notice now the red box disappears because now my syntax is correct. All right, let's go ahead and enter one more. And this would be for Bob here, my good friend, comma, and then of course I'm going to use Brown. So same thing, it's just easier that way. So I'm going to go ahead and say bob.brown@claydesk.com, and then of course the phone number for Bob. So 311. I'm just making these up. These are fictitious, by the way, so not to worry. All right, perfect. So end this, close the parentheses, and then now I'm going to use a semicolon because that would be the end of this particular. So now here I'm simply inserting values, and I can, by the way, close this so you can see the entire code. Perfect. So insert into university students, and of course the name of the columns and then the values. So you can continue on as to as many values you like to insert. So let's execute this query, and notice it gives me an error, and it says unknown column email phone number in field list. So email phone number, perfect. So as I noticed the syntax error right here on the top, it's actually email and then comma, not a dot. Okay, there we go. So we have first name, we have last name, we have email, and we have phone number. And I can specify, and I can just cross check from the actual name so I don't do a typo here. Great. Let's execute the query again. Great. This time it's successful, and it inserts all these rows into our table. How can I check? Of course, I need to bring up the query grid, or the grid itself, the result grid rather, and you'll notice, there we go. We have John, Jane, Alice, and Bob. All these are now part of our table. This data is now inserted into our table. Great. Similarly, one more example, I'm going to give you the set syntax so it's easier for you to see. Let's go back to our table, and what this does, it simply allows you to add in one line. So instead of using values and specifying detailed lines, I can just give one command, and I can use, for example, the set syntax. So let me demonstrate quickly before I move forward. So this is going to be insert into university students, and I'm going to go ahead and just change the keyword here. I'm going to say set, and this time it's going to be first name, or let me delete these so you don't get confused. Perfect. There we go. So basically the set command is an alternative way to enter data. So instead of using values and breaking them down, you can just do it into one liner. So let's go ahead and do university students, and I'm going to go ahead and set this option and using the set syntax. So here I'm going to say set first name, and I'm directly assigning, I'm going to equal this to, let's say, Dave right here, or David, right? So this would be the first name, comma, and then last name would be equals Green. So you get the idea, right? So you can continue on using this. Similarly, I can do email equals, and I can say david.green@playdesk.com, and let's do one more, and I can have to do this in the single quotes. Perfect. And notice it changes the color too, so you get to see as you move forward whether you're doing it right or not. So last is the phone number, so phone number, and then equals, and I'm going to go ahead and say, let's say 571-123-2121. Great. And then this with a semicolon, and that's it. So now here I'm simply using the set syntax, right, and inserting data into our university students table. So let's execute this query. On the bottom here, you'll notice in the action output, it is successful, and I can bring up the result grid, and there we go. So our fifth ID is David Green, and we have the data into our table. I hope this helps. Practice with different variations of the insert into and adding multiple data into your table. Let me know if you have any questions with this. Let's move to the next lesson.